In this video, I will teach you everything you need to know about the Microsoft Word Layout tab and ribbon in depth. Let's get started. So here I am in a document, and if I browse down to page 2, you'll see that it's an article about music. And let's say I would like to change up the layout of this article. All I would have to do is go up here to the Word ribbon and click on Layout, and it gives me a bunch of different layout options. Let's take them from left to right. Here, if I click on Margins, I can quickly change up the margins of this document. This document happens to have some unusual margins already set up. But if I click here on Margins and choose Normal, it will adjust the margins so that it's more typical of what you would see in most Word documents. Now, I may have to delete some blank spaces that I've put in, but that now should look a lot more typical of most Word documents. And that was pretty easy for me to do just by clicking here on Margins and choosing Normal. I could try narrow margins, and you can see how that affects the document. It instantly reformats the content, and you can see it fills the page now a lot more from left to right, and actually top to bottom as well. And you can see why. It's because instead of a 1-inch margin for each side of the document, we have a 0.5-inch margin. We could go to a moderate margin setting or any of these others. I'm going to go back to narrow, but I want you to also see that there's an option for custom margins. When you choose that, you get a page setup pop-up, and you can just go in here and specify exactly what you would like each of the margins to be. Maybe my top margin, I'd like it to be a little bigger than the rest of the margins. How about 1.5 inches? Left margin, let's say 0.6, right, also 0.6, and the bottom margin maybe 0.8. Now, in most cases, you don't need it to be that exact or specific. In fact, in most cases, you'll just want to go with the normal margins or one of the other kind of standard margin settings. Now, in addition to these 4 margin settings that we have, there are also some gutter settings. Now, what in the world is this? What is gutter in a Word document and the gutter position? This refers to extra space that you may want in your document, space that will be used when you bind the pages together into a book or a packet or some other collection of papers. So if you want to make sure that your important text isn't obscured, isn't covered up by a binding, right? If all of these pages are going to be bound together here at the left, you may want to put in some extra space, and you can do that in the form of a gutter. So I'm going to put in, let's say, a 2-inch gutter, and I want the position of the gutter to be at the left. You could change it to the top if you want. If I click OK, look what happens. It scoots everything over to the right so that there's enough space here at the left for you to bind those pages together into a book or a packet or a booklet. Okay, I'm going to go back to Margins, Custom Margin. I don't really need the gutter, so I'll change that back to 0. Tap Enter. And next, in the page setup window that popped up when I clicked on Margins, you'll see that there are other options available. We're going to look at these in a little bit different way here on the ribbon. So for now, I'm just going to click OK to get back to my normal view of my document. Okay, next to the Margins button in the Page Setup group, we have Orientation. And this is page or paper orientation. So if I click here on the button, it lets me switch from a portrait view to a landscape view. And to help you see this better, I'm just going to go to File, Print, and you can see that now my document is a lot wider, and it is wider than it is tall. I'll click this arrow to go back to my document, and I'll switch the orientation back to Portrait. Next, we have size. This is the size of the paper that you want to print this document onto. So do you want letter size? That's the most common, 8.5 by 11. But another common paper size is legal. So if you're using legal paper, that's what you choose. There's all of these other options as well. If you need more options, you can click More Paper Sizes and specify even more specifically what the width and the height of the paper is going to be, and then just click OK. Now, if you always use legal size paper or some other less common size of paper, you very well may want to set it as the default paper size. In my case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cancel out because I almost always use 8.5 by 11 size paper. Let's move on now to columns. As you can see in my document, there really aren't columns. It's just all, I guess, one column. But if I click here on columns, I could switch from 1 to 2, and now all of my content is divided up into 2 columns. I think this looks beautiful. If you're writing an article, or if you're trying to publish a newsletter, let's say a school newsletter with updates about the school and what's going on, or a family newsletter or a business, this is a great way to divide up your content and make it easier to read. So try that out, switching from one column to two. We've also got 3 columns, and we've got another option here for more columns. You could set it up to have, let's say, 5 columns. Not a great idea, in my opinion. That's going to make the content way too narrow, and that's why in Microsoft Word, by default, you can only do 1, 2, or 3 columns. Now, if I go back to 2 columns, look what I can do. I can click on columns again and say left. If you do it that way, notice what happens. On the left side, you have a smaller column, and then on the right side, you have a bigger chunk of text. I could switch that to the right. Now we have the narrow column on the right and the bigger chunk of text on the left. So this columns button is very helpful for formatting your document, setting up the layout of the text in your document. I'm going to hold Control and tap Z a couple of times. It looks like 3 or 4 times to get me back to the point where I want to continue. Okay, we have a few more options here in the page setup group. Let's take a look at page breaks. Let's say that I want my document to be divided up into chapters. And maybe here is the end of chapter 1, and I would like to have a page break. I want the next page to start on a new paper. I could just click where I want the page break to be set up, and then I go up here to the Layout tab, Page Setup Group, and I click on Breaks. And there are several different types of page breaks. I'm just going to focus on the most common. I'll click here on Page, and now at the end of chapter 1, there's a page break that clearly conveys the idea that we're moving on now to a new section of the document, and it begins on the next page. There are other options here in the Breaks button, so definitely check out column breaks, text wrapping, and also section breaks and those options. Also, I have other videos on using page breaks in Microsoft Word, so please check out those videos if you want to learn more. Next, let's move on to line numbers. When I click on line numbers, it shows that I right now have no line numbers. I could add continuous line numbers, and you can see it's exactly what you would have expected. Each line in this document now is numbered. I can think of various ways to use line numbers or situations in which they would be very useful. For example, let's say you have a very important document, a legal document or some other document, and everybody that's using that document is going to need to be able to find the exact point in the document that you're talking about. Line numbers might really help with that. You could have everyone go to line number 58, and everyone would immediately be in the same place in the document. So that's a great feature. Notice that you can set it to restart each page rather than continuing the numbering from the last page. So you could say go to page 3, line number 7, and everyone would be able to be in the same spot. You could also set it to restart each section. Another nice feature is this, suppress for current paragraph. So let's say I highlight this paragraph here. I could just go up to line numbers, suppress for current paragraph, and it's kind of like just skipping those lines in that paragraph. It's assumed that they're part of line number 2 in this case. In addition to those line numbers options, we have even more line numbering options here. You can open up this dialog box in which you can make even more settings for your line numbers. You would just go down here, click this button, and make some adjustments. For example, you could count by 2s instead of by 1, and we have other options as well. I'm just going to cancel out of those, and let's move on to hyphenation. And hyphenation, of course, has to do with how words at the right side of the page are dealt with, especially if they're longer words. So right now I have no hyphenation going on, but if I switch to automatic, you can see what happens. The word contemporary is too long to fit here at the right, but because I've turned on hyphenation, Word fits as much as it can of contemporary onto this line, and the rest of it is put on the next line, but with a nice hyphen showing that the word continues. Going back up to hyphenation, I'm going to switch it off, and then I'll switch to manual hyphenation. When you do that, you get to choose in each case how to hyphenate these words. So do I want to hyphenate after the first syllable, second, etc.? So how about the first syllable? I'll say yes, and then Word moves on to the next example, flamboyant. Now, why might this be important? Well, in some cases, if you use automatic hyphenation, it's possible that the word that is produced might be an inappropriate word, or it might be confusing to the reader. And so even though in most cases, just automatic hyphenation will do the job and it will be fine, it will be great, there are times when you might want to double check. You might want to use manual hyphenation just to make sure that the words that are showing up on a particular line are appropriate and are the way that you want them to be. So in addition to those options, we have some more hyphenation options, and you can check those out if you need them. So I'll cancel out. In addition to these visible tools that I have in the page setup group, we do have what I call a launch button, or it's sometimes also called a dialog box launch button. I'll just click on that, and you can see that a lot of these options I've been showing you are really all accessible from the same dialog box. You can switch from margin options, paper options, to layout options, and we have additional tools and options here. So in most cases, I just use the tools that are visible here, but if you want them all together all at once, you can just click this button and browse through the different sub-tabs. Okay, let's move on over to the paragraph group. Let's say that a particular paragraph needs to be handled a little bit differently than some of the other paragraphs. You can highlight that paragraph and then adjust the indents and or the spacing for that paragraph. So let's say I want this paragraph to have a little bit more of a left indent. I can just change those numbers here. I could also put in a right indent if I want to. And sometimes with the right indent, you may not notice any change until you click it a few times. But by changing these settings, I can really make a particular paragraph stand out or pop so that it's noticed a lot easier than it otherwise would be. Let's look at spacing. What spacing does is it changes the amount of space between this paragraph and whatever's above it, and also whatever's below it. So how about above or before? I can just change that by clicking here or even typing in the specific number that I want. What about after the paragraph? Again, I can just click on these arrows to adjust it, or I can type in the numbers. So all of these options here are really to help us make a paragraph pop or stand out in some way from the other paragraphs. If you want, you can use it for all the paragraphs at once. You could click and drag to select all of them and then make your changes. And so it does work for that as well. Just like I showed with the page setup group, we do have a dialog box launcher button for the paragraph group, so you can click there to get even more options and tools, including options and tools for line and page breaks. I'm going to cancel out of that. And let's move on now to the Arrange group on the Layout tab and ribbon. Now, to properly show this, I need some images or shapes or other objects. So I'm going to go up here to the Insert tab and go to the Illustrations group. I'll click on Pictures, Online Pictures, and I'm going to search for New Wave Music. That's what this article is about. And I'll select this image of a flock of seagulls, maybe soft cell, and maybe I'll select this image here, and then I'll click Insert. And so those three images should be inserted into the document. Now I'll go back to the Layout tab, and now that I have these visual elements on my document, and one of them is selected, notice that my Arrange group has some actual options to choose from. So I'm going to select my first image here. With this picture of the band A Flock of Seagulls selected, I can go here to Wrap Text, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to choose to have this image be either in front of the text or behind the text. There are other options as well, but I'm going to choose in front of text. As soon as you do that, it makes the image easily editable. So I can click and drag on the corner to make it smaller. I can click and drag to move it anywhere I want it to be in my document. Notice that it does cover up text if you put it on top of the text, so that's something to watch out for. But I'm just going to get it down to a size where it'll work for me in my document. Notice that it is distorting the image a little bit, but if I hold the Shift key as I resize it, it will not distort the image. So I'm going to make it about that size, put it where I want it to be. Now there are other options. If you click on an image and choose, instead of wrap text behind text or in front of text, if you choose square or tight, look what happens. The text kind of wraps around the image. And so again, this is an option that is particularly good if you're writing an article or creating a newsletter and you want the text to wrap around the images that you have in the document. So that's up to you, and you can get those options here in Wrap Text. I really like behind text or in front of text. I use those the most, but you should use the ones that you find to be the most helpful. All right, I'm going to do a similar thing here with this third image. I'll have it be behind the text. You can see the difference there, but still it kind of unlocks the image so that you can drag it wherever you want it to be. Okay, so with these three images now in my document, I can now move on to some of the other options that we have in Arrange. In addition to wrap text, we have some position options. So I'm going to click here on this image of a flock of seagulls, and I'm going to go to the Arrange group and click on Position. Some of the options I have are to put the image in line with the text. So it lined it up exactly at the left edge of my text. That's a great option. I could also choose to have it be at the top of my document, or I could choose position upper right, bottom center, lower left, any of these options. And notice that it does add text wrapping if you choose the options here. There are also even more layout options here at the bottom, and you can look through those if you need them. Okay, now let's move on to these next two, bring forward and send backward. And to show you this, I'm going to put these three images all together. So we have some overlapping of these three images. Let's say that I want the overlapping to be handled differently. Maybe I want the soft cell image to be at the top. I would just click on the soft cell image and choose bring forward. And you may need to click it a few times before it moves all the way to the position that you want it to be in. Now there's also an option to bring it in front of the text. If you remember, I chose to make this image behind the text. If I click here, it brings it all the way to the front and in front of the text. If I click on this image, let's try that one, bring to front. Now it is at the frontmost level of these images. Now send backward works the same way. Every time I click that, it sends this image back one level, so that the overlapping shows up differently. You can also click the bottom part of the Send Backwards button to send text all the way back or even behind the text. Now to help with all of this relating to layers, you can click here where it says Selection Pane, and you get a nice handy pane that shows up at the right. And this selection pane can really be helpful to just help you to select exactly what you want to select. With so many things overlapping each other and covering up different content, it's hard to sometimes click on the exact item that you want to select. So to help us with that, the selection pane is here. So I can click on text box 2 in this case, and it selects this image, or picture 1 also selects the image. I could click on picture 4, and this image is selected. Once it's selected, I can then resize it easier or move it. And so really this selection pane just helps us to more easily select exactly what we want to select. Okay, I'm done with the selection pane. Finally, let's look at these last three options that we have: align, group, and rotate. So I'm going to click on this image here, and then I'll hold the control key and select this other image, and I'm still holding control, and I tap the third image. So I have 3 images selected here. Now this would work with 2 images or 5 or whatever you want to select. But with these images selected, I'm going to go up to the Arrange Group and select Align. I want to align these 3 pictures at their centers. Now sometimes it takes a few seconds for this to actually work, but you can see it did work. They're all aligned at the center. With them still selected, notice that I can choose Align Left. Now they're all going to be lined up at the left edge. Align Right at the right edge. You can also align Top. Now this makes them all overlap, but at their top edges, they're all lined up perfectly. We can align them middle. Again, they're going to be overlapped, so it's going to be hard to see. But if I click away and then click on one of these images, you'll see that they're all now perfectly aligned at their middles. I'm going to hold Control and tap Z a couple of times, so they're all selected again, and then I'll click Align, Align Bottom, and now the bottom edges, trust me, are all lined up. If I click away and then click and drag, you can see that that's true. Again, Control Z a couple of times gets me back. Going back to align, I can also distribute horizontally or vertically. Now to show this a little bit better, I'm going to hold Control and tap Z a few more times to get back to our original setup of the 3 images. These 3 images are still all selected. I'll go to align, and I'm going to distribute these 3 images horizontally. What this does is it organizes these images and distributes them horizontally. Now to show that a little better, I've deleted the text box that was with this image. If I do the same steps now and distribute horizontally, you can see what it does. They're all spaced the same distance from each other. I could distribute them vertically. So now, given the positions of the top image and the bottom image, it vertically put this image exactly where it thought it should be to make them vertically distributed perfectly. Now we do have some other align options here that you can look into, including adding a grid to help you align your documents a little easier. And you can click here on View Grid Lines to show those grid lines to help you line up your images or other visual elements the way that you want them to be lined up. I'm going to take off View Grid Lines. Okay, we also have some grouping tools. So let's say I want to create kind of a collage. I'm going to click on this image here, bring it forward, and I can create, let's say, a kind of collage. I'm going to bring this image forward in front of the text even, and I'll just place this here. I know this doesn't look amazing, but this is going to be my collage. So in this case, what I may want to do is select all 3 items. I just clicked on one. I'm holding Control. I click on the second one. Still holding Control. I click on the third image. So all 3 are selected. And I can go here to Group and choose to group these 3 items into one item, one collage. Now they can be resized all as one. They can be moved all as one. These 3 items are essentially now just one item. Now if I click on my collage again, I can go back up to Group and ungroup them, and now they're each individual items. All right, our last tool here on the layout ribbon is Rotate, and it's just what you would expect. You can rotate to the right 90 degrees. You can do that again, just keep rotating around. You can also rotate left 90 degrees. You can flip an image vertically. So let's look at this soft cell image. If I click Rotate, Flip vertically, it just makes it upside down. I can also flip it horizontally. So let's try that. Flip horizontal, and we have more rotation options as well. I'm going to cancel out of that. Many of you know that there are other ways to rotate images or other visual elements. We can click on those objects or elements and then use this rotate button to get the exact rotation that we want. And it's also possible to flip an image or other object vertically or horizontally just by using these handles. But sometimes it's hard to get it to the perfect dimensions that you want, and that's why you may want to just select the image and use this rotate button, flip vertically, flip horizontally. There's no clicking and dragging and making a mistake that kind of warps the image. Instead, with the perfect sizes and positions, you're just flipping the image vertically or horizontally. So those are all of the tools and options that we have on the Microsoft Word Layout tab and ribbon. We've looked at them in depth. And if you like this video, please check out the rest of the videos in this series. We're looking at each of the Microsoft Word tabs and ribbons in depth. We're going to go through all of the default tabs and ribbons. And if you haven't already done so, please watch my Microsoft Word for Beginners, the complete course, master video. This video will teach you everything you need to know to jump right in and use Microsoft Word like the professionals. So check that out. But for now, thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it to be helpful. If you did, please like, follow, and subscribe. And when you do, click the bell and you'll be notified when I post another video. If you'd like to support my channel, the best way to do that is to become a channel member. You could also click the thanks button below the video. You could support me through my Patreon account or by buying channel merch, and you'll see information about those options in the description below the video.